The Madeline Journeys, Book 3, A Twist of Power. Chapter 1. Madeline held the yellow ribbon and stared at Blue. The little monk was sitting across from her, a matching ribbon laid across his upturned palms. He was muttering so quietly that she had to strain to hear the words he spoke. Her responses to his statements were the only things keeping the spell intact until they finished. "The net holds against all forces." Blue's voice held no sign of the effort he was pouring into the spell. "Against all forces, the net flexes to hold," Madeline whispered. She tried to keep her fingers light on the ribbon because it represented the net of protective spells they held over Arabella's house. If she held the ribbon too tightly, the net would become rigid and, with enough force, shatter rather than flex. 3 days ago, when she'd returned from the Choi Temple with her friends, Madeline had hoped that the threats against Arabella's son would fade away. Until her best friend was safe, she wasn't going to return home. Until she returned home, Madeline feared she would never be able to have her own child. The life she'd been living on the road was too stressful. Unfortunately, the threat was still active and growing worse. It was getting more difficult as time passed not to push back on the attacks. What she really wanted to do is blast all the power back down the line and fry the magic of whoever was at the other end. Blue had considered it when she announced the idea, but quickly said it wasn't possible. Madeline watched the golden protective net shudder one more time, then settle, like jello when it was turned out of a bowl. She breathed out a long, shuddering lungful of air and waited until Blue told her to stop feeding power to the spell. "It is enough for now," Blue said after a moment. "Let us rest and eat. I'm afraid that each attack is meant to drain us of power until we are unable to repel even a child's effort." Madeline stretched and felt the knots in her shoulders relax. She took his ribbon and placed both of them in a small travel chest beside the table. "I was almost convinced that this was a peaceful world. Well, peaceful enough given the way the Scree behave. And the Choi." She snorted a laugh. "Where did I get that idea? Since you brought me here, I've spent most of my time fighting off one or another of the species of the world, and killing too many beings to save the people she loved. In her old life, she defended people in court, not in battle. There, no one had died." Blue stood, only coming up to her shoulder, and took her arm. "He must be shrinking. We used to be closer to the same height. Now he must be only about 4 feet tall." He led her to the door. "Perhaps the months you spent at your home with your husband were peaceful enough to make you forget that few living beings are satisfied with what they have in life. With dissatisfaction comes conflict." Madeline pulled open the heavy wooden doors to the room. Arabella's home reminded her of Renaissance chateaux in France, solid and safe, the walls warmed with rich, intricate tapestries and the floors with bright rugs. Perhaps, but these last few weeks have pushed those memories to the back of my mind. "Well, we are safe for now," Blue said, pulling her towards the stairs. "I smell pastry. Let us join whoever is baking and hope for a taste." Madeline inhaled the aroma of butter and cinnamon. The intensity made her stomach rumble. Magic took a lot out of her. It also allowed her to eat whatever she wanted. Practicing spells was better than any boot camp program, and usually more fun. "Good idea, and maybe Calistro will be there, and we can help to organize the wedding. Anything will be more interesting than casting protection spells." Who would have guessed I'd become tired of magic? Blue started down the staircase. "Indeed, a happy occasion is just what we need to refresh our spirits." He turned towards her, a sly smile on his face. "I am surprised at Simon's hurry to perform the ceremony. He has not shown himself to be comfortable with committing to one woman. Is this normal for men in your world?" When Madeline was transported to Cartreff, Simon came with her. In their old world, he'd been her assistant. When they arrived here, he'd started a rock band within a few days. The band had been the distraction when the attack on Sayer Goddard had happened. Now he was managing the music business for what seemed like the whole world. Madeline laughed. The last weight of the worry she'd been carrying since this morning's attack started lifting from her shoulders. I suspect you are behind the haste. I thought you won the pool that the goblins started. Didn't you pick a date in the next couple of weeks? Perhaps I have counseled them to hasten the date, but no one has won until the wedding takes place. Blue's smile was all innocence, and it made Madeline laugh again. I think you're right. With these attacks, it's probably a good idea to get the formalities over with in case... Well, let's not guess what might happen. Crossing the great hall with its fireplace and scattered chairs, they entered the kitchen. As they stepped through the archway, a warm blanket of belonging wrapped around Madeline. Something she'd never felt back in her world of lawyers and career momentum and frozen dinners. The room was large, hot, and full of savory aromas. The chatter of the kitchen staff was a counterpoint to the sound of crackling logs in the ovens. Simon, dressed in a white tunic over forest green trousers, was charming a tray of cinnamon buns from the cook. Callistra, raven hair pulled into a simple braid, was sitting beside Arabella. Their heads bent over a gurgling bundle in Arabella's arms. Tadric, heir to the Summerlands, and the target of these attacks. The child shared his mother's green eyes, but his curly hair was dark brown. Madeline left Blue and poured mugs of calf. Before she filled the last one, Joe joined her at the counter. Even after a year, her breath caught when he was near. Tall, blonde, and romance novel handsome, he had captured her heart despite her reservations. I missed you, he whispered in her ear. I will be glad to have you to myself again when this threat is over. Come and see what my son has learned, Arabella called before Madeline could answer him. Arabella sat Tadric on the floor, and the child remained upright without support. You see how strong he is? She caught him as he started to flop onto his side. Well, for a short time, anyway. Madeline reached for Tadric, and the child held out his arms for her. She settled him on her lap, wondering if her firstborn would be a boy. You are pale, Jode said as he put a plate of tidbits in front of her. Are you resting yourself enough? I do not wish to lose you. She kissed the top of Tadric's head, feeling the tickle of his fine hair against her cheek. Then, smiling up at Jode, she reached for a pastry filled with minced and spiced pork. We are being careful. Maybe too careful. I think I need to talk to Blue again about going on the offensive. If we only repel the attacks as they come, we will eventually fail. Jode glanced at the boy in Madeline's arms. The Summerlands have already lost Ulrich. If they lose his son, it will leave them open for anyone to take control. There will be bloodshed. Arabella reached for her son. If there were other heirs, we would know who was attacking. But Ulrich was an only child of an only child. And now Tadric is following the tradition. Madeline took a bite of the pastry before speaking. Then there must be a way to do something. It is too risky to change tactics, Blue said. If we lose a defense, we lose everything. Neither of us have the power to hold the net alone. Neither of us has the power to attack alone. Madeline knew her teacher was right. But being right was not going to be good enough if this kept up longer. There must be a way, she said. I'm not going to give up so easily. You can sleep, Blue said as Madeline jerked out of a doze hours later. In fact, we should both sleep. No attacks have happened at night yet. I imagine our enemy is as wary of night spells as we are. Madeline rubbed her eyes to force herself to alertness. She believed Blue, but didn't think she would be able to sleep properly, knowing she would be woken if... No, when an attack came. I can nap here. You go to your bed. I'll be able to hold off anything that comes long enough to wake you. Blue shook his head. It is not your responsibility alone to keep the wards, but I do not know that I will rest with this threat hanging over us either. Let us talk. Perhaps that will soothe us enough to rest. Madeline felt Blue's touch on the protective net withdraw until it was only a single thread of contact. She followed suit and felt her energy rise slightly with the change. He was right. People here did not do magic at night. She was not sure why. Jode had tried to explain, but she still didn't understand. It didn't matter. Apparently spells could continue through the night. They just couldn't be cast in safety. So the net would survive until dawn, when they would have to refresh the power. "Let me get someone to bring us warm tea," she said, rising from the chair to open the door. "It will help us to relax." A servant was waiting in a chair outside the door. Madeline knew everyone in the household was prepared to support them, but she still felt guilty that this maid was losing her sleep on the off chance they might need something. "Mary, can you bring us some tea? And then you can go to your bed. We won't need anything more tonight." The girl nodded and slipped away towards the stairs. Madeline returned to the room and moved to throw cushions from the 2 upholstered chairs so they could curl up. That way, if they fell asleep, at least they would be comfortable. Mary returned with tea and 2 bowls of oatmeal, rich with cream and dried fruit. "Cook said this will help you sleep." When they were alone again, Madeline settled into one of the chairs and waited until Blue did the same. "I think we need a plan." She poked the spoon into the porridge but didn't feel like eating. Her nerves were shredded from just waiting and waiting. Whoever is attacking isn't going to get bored and just stop. Blue didn't answer for a few minutes. Only the fact that he sipped his tea let Madeline know he was still awake. She knew better than to interrupt his thoughts. Even if she had a plan, he would know something that would improve it. That is, if she could convince him to go on the attack. Finally, he placed his cup on the wide arm of his chair. "You think I am willing to outweight our attacker? But I have been thinking the same thing. We are at a disadvantage. It is taking all of our power to hold the protections, and we will fail if that does not change." Madeline rose to get the teapot. Topping off both cups, she said, "Is there someone we can trust to help us?" There were no others capable of magic in Arabella's household, as far as Madeline knew, and they couldn't spare the energy or time to call someone from far away. "There is someone. I have not asked him yet, because I thought we would have solved this problem by now." Attacks on Tadric were more than a problem, but Blue was the master of the understatement, so Madeline didn't argue. "Who? I thought I knew everyone here. Has someone come in the last few days?" "You forget about the musicians. Zora is an Eldman as well as a talented entertainer." Blue reached for his oatmeal and started picking out the fruit and eating it. In the silence, Madeline thought about how Zora could help. "As far as I remember, Eldmen can only do small magic, and their spells take a long time because of all the chanting." Blue nodded and continued to pick out the fruit. Madeline handed him her bowl. "Here, you might as well enjoy mine too. So are you telling me they have more power than it seems, or am I missing something?" "No, they use all of their power. Are you sure you do not want any of the fruit?" Blue's question was polite, but he had already taken a slice of apple in his fingers. Madeline shook her head and went back to thinking out the answer. Blue rarely told her what she needed to know, so she'd become used to puzzling it out. "So that means he can't take my place, or yours." She didn't look at Blue. He knew she needed to talk it through before she came to her conclusion. "Can you use him as a battery?" "What is that?" "You store power in one and use it later." Madeline had an ethical twinge about using someone that way. It didn't seem right. "They give you control over their power." "An interesting idea." Blue placed the bowl on the floor beside his chair. "I have spells that will allow the caster to channel another's power, but it does not require relinquishing control. I do not know if anyone would be willing or desperate enough to agree, and I do not know of a spell that will allow you to store magic for use later." That would have been too easy. Madeline tried to think a path through the growing fog of exhaustion. "He can do another spell. Yes, he can find help, or he can seek a clue in the identity of whoever is attacking us." Blue smiled at her excitement. "I think we can try both. If we sleep, perhaps one of us can spare some power to his spell and allow him to reach as far as the mountains." Madeline nodded, the thoughts coming quickly. "We could also send the goblins out to find help from other humans, or perhaps from a fae. They could even go past the mountains. I hope I can eventually find a spell that will remove that restriction." Blue curled up in his chair. "Another very good idea. Now sleep. I fear we will be tested again in the morning." Madeline watched her teacher slide quickly into sleep. Her mind was still churning, and she needed to let it slow down. If Zora could call someone, she'd suggest a fae, because they can see at a distance. Blue was certain that the attacks were coming from the northeast. Tomorrow she'd ask Joe to show her what was on the map there, other than just mountains. Tomorrow they would talk to Zora about helping, and to the goblins. They could move fast. Not magic, but it seemed like it sometimes. She blinked and felt her cup slipping from her hand. Placing it on the floor beside her chair, Madeline pulled her shawl around her and curled up to let sleep take her. Tomorrow, she thought, it will all work out. Tomorrow they would save the world. When Zora joined them the next morning, Madeline let Blue talk. She monitored the protective net while they spoke. It left her able to listen, but most of her concentration stayed with the magic. The little she had left was used to worry about how she would channel the Eldman magic. So it seems if we do not act to identify the attacker, we will soon be too tired to maintain the safety of the household. We need your help, Blue finished. Zora nodded and walked to the window, his stocky figure blocking most of the light from the opening. I can lend you my power for a short time. One of you can try to trace the attacks. He returned to the table. Also, I can ask to go to the Fae. As she was about to ask more about borrowing magic, Madeline felt a touch from outside the protections. Not an attack, but a gentle test of strength. Blue! She beckoned them over. Blue reached out with his power and felt the spells. This is not the same person. Madeline reached for Zora's hand to bring him into their magic loop. She saw his presence in the net as red streaks against the golden glow. So, power was power. As long as Zora accessed his own magic, she could channel it. Strong magic, Zora said. Take what you need of my power. I will not need my magic any time soon. Madeline felt power surge through her connection to the Eldman. The net glowed brightly, then settled back to a glimmer. Zora's magic, now a pale yellow mist, wove itself around the ribbons of her own. The press from outside came again, gentle but persistent. Is there any way we can reach through to find out who this is without weakening the spell? The touch was so different from the slamming attack that she couldn't imagine it was a trap. This was like a child tugging at a mother's sleeve for attention. The attacks were brutal as a battering ram on a screen door. It will be difficult, Blue said. Any breach of the dome will open the way for attack. We will have to be very careful. Zora shifted towards Madeline and slipped his hands to her shoulder. I can stay in the link and still leave you with your hands free to work the ribbons with Blue, he whispered. Madeline glanced at him. His eyes were shut and his lips were moving. Eldman chanted their magic, and Madeline knew that Zora would keep his chant going until they told him to stop, no matter how long it took. She turned to Blue, leaving only a thread of concentration on the protections. We could ignore this. Perhaps it's a trap. Blue simply looked at her until she sighed and admitted, I don't feel any threat. But it could still be a trap. How can we take a chance? Instead of answering, Blue opened his chest of ribbons and started picking through them. Madeline thought about the possibilities. If you and Zora were ready to deal with anything that happened, I could reach through and connect with whoever this is. Blue handed her a green ribbon. Yes, that is how we do it. But I will be the one to reach through. You are linked to Zora already. I will not allow you to be in danger. He handed her several more ribbons. Madeline laid them across her lap. Are you sure I'm capable of pulling you back fast enough? It will all be in the ribbons. If you feel any danger, pull them towards you and I will follow. Blue interrupted Zora's silent chant to explain what they were doing. The Eldman nodded and moved to sit behind Madeline, placing a hand on each of her shoulders. You will be able to draw from me as quickly as if it was your own power now. Do not speak to me until you are finished, or it will break my access to the magic. They settled down and Madeline focused on the net. She saw a golden thread snake towards the center of the spell dome. The questioning pressure tapped again. The thread of Blue's power zipped into the dent and wiggled through the weave of the net. Madeline tightened her grip on the ribbons, ready to yank Blue back. His probe extended through the mesh and stopped. Madeline waited, feeling Zora's power fill her veins, warm and reassuring. Suddenly a familiar heat rushed towards the net. Attack! Madeline yanked the ribbons onto her lap and winced as the flash of gold scored across her senses. She flooded the net with Zora's power. The attacker flashed away from the net and left. "It's done," Madeline said, bringing her focus back to the room. Zora's hand slipped from her shoulders as he stopped muttering. "That was exhilarating. I have never used so much power at one time." He shook himself and reached for one of the breakfast sandwiches. Blue was wiping his face with the corner of his robe. He was pale, but Madeline thought he looked unhurt. "Did you learn anything before the attack? Was it a trick? Have some tea." Madeline reached for the pot that was warming on the hearth. Blue accepted a cup and then motioned for her to sit. "I'm fine, Madeline. Keep calm. I believe we have done some damage to our enemy. But no, it was not a trick. I was able to make contact, but we were torn apart with the attack." He reached to take a muffin from the tray. "And?" "Yes, Blue, stop tormenting us," Zora said around a mouthful of sandwich. "What did you learn?" "I learned that we hurt the attacker. I think we will have some time of peace today at least." Madeline restrained herself. Blue would string this out as long as he could. It was a good sign. If it was bad news, he would have told them straight out. "That is a relief. I think Zora will have to rest and rebuild his energy. So, was it worth the risk?" "Our visitor told me that the answer lies in the city and a stranger who is not a stranger." "That's not much. Was there anything else?" "The presence was male, that is all I can tell you." Madeline reached for her own breakfast as she suppressed the urge to press harder for information. She reminded herself that nothing here was simple. "Where is the city?" Zora pointed towards the mountains. "North, over the mountains, in the Marai lands. 2 days if you go by horse, and not too many of you." Heat rushed through Madeline's body and then drained away, leaving her feeling dizzy and nauseated. She pushed aside her plate and said, "I think we need to go tomorrow." Blue nodded as he picked fruit from the muffin. "It will be good to have these attacks come to an end." The nausea passed, leaving behind a ravenous hunger. She watched the two men as she devoured a muffin. Blue, tiny and deceptively fragile, looking serene as usual. Zora, solid and stern, his movements deliberate as he chose his food from the plate. "How will we know you're safe?" she asked, hoping for some kind of magical cell phone. Blue smiled at her. "You must have faith, Madeline. We will endure until we no longer need to." When she opened her mouth to ask for something more concrete, he chuckled. "And I think we will send you a message if anything changes."